My name is Joy McDermid. I'm glad to join you today. I'm going to be talking about sex and gender in firefighter health research, some challenges and solutions. I have no disclosures other than research funds that have gone to support the work that we'll be talking about. Today's objectives are to describe the importance and challenges in conducting health research addressing women firefighters and give some examples from firewall studies and some solutions. This slide just reminds us the difference between what we mean when we say sex and gender. Sex is biological. It has to do with our genes and our anatomy and our structure and how our bodies function. Gender is a socially constructed idea that can change over time and between different societies and even within families. It's about how society sees us and how we see ourselves. It is surprising that only recently has there been emphasis on how important it is to understand the difference that sex and gender can make when it comes to health research. This slide illustrates a problem in pain research. The blue shows how much of the research has focused on males only, and only a very small percentage has focused on females or looked at sex differences. As a result, most of our understanding of pain physiology is the understanding of male pain physiology. That leads directly into some of the challenges and solutions that we have to face when we're doing research on firefighter health for women. The first challenge is, why are women still just 3% of the firefighter workforce? We know that it has a lot to do with social attitudes about what work roles men and women should occupy. Women firefighter organizations are very busy on some of the work solutions, like changing societal attitudes, targeted recruitment, making the fire service a good place to work. From a research perspective, we've adopted strategies like qualitative studies, where we do an in-depth analysis of a smaller number of participants, of pooling data across different studies, and targeted recruitment. One of our first studies was this small, qualitative, unfunded study which, despite being on only 4 of the 5 firefighters in Hamilton, gave us a lot of information. What amazes me about this study is how useful the themes are and how they have continued to inform our work. We heard from the women firefighters that they recognized that firefighting was a physically demanding job, and they already knew there were gender-related physiological differences, with women not being as strong, and a little bit of confusion about whether they actually had a lower VO2 max than men. An important theme that will show up later again is compensatory strategies. The women talked about how biomechanics was very important for them. The guys can usually manhandle things, but I had to learn to use my body a bit more effectively. They also talked about problems with equipment not fitting correctly. The boots are always too big, and bunker pants, everything is kind of big. We identified this problem during the study, and when the Hamilton Fire Service heard from the women, they immediately found a vendor who was able to provide firefighting equipment designed specifically with women in mind. And this illustrates how research can sometimes solve a problem before the research is even published. The women talked about how important it was to earn respect, and there was a lot of conversations about the attitudes of male counterparts. Some people have attitudes that aren't going to change no matter what you do. No matter how good a firefighter you are, you're a woman in a man's job and you shouldn't be here. They also illustrated the importance of attitudes on team collaboration and training. They refused to train us because they didn't want us to be good. If we were good, then I guess they wouldn't look masculine. Another problem we have, and this has been highlighted by women firefighters, is that often they're excluded from research. When researchers do go ahead and do a research project on firefighters, they exclude the women, and some of the excuses that are used that there's just too few women for us to do statistical analysis. Women's results are too variable. They ruin our results. Or women have cycles. Of course, those examples of excuses are ridiculous, but they're actually things that are being said. So in response, there have been documents created that say how sex and gender should be included in research in order for it to be equitable for both men and women. And this document talks about how sex and gender have to be considered in all phases of the research, including why there might be differences between men and women, how the data is collected, and how it's analyzed and presented. In the next couple of slides, I'm just going to illustrate a couple of our projects on musculoskeletal health to indicate how there were challenges and how we tried to address them. Here's a study we published on looking at the prevalence and distribution of musculoskeletal problems in firefighters. And you can see here, we were dealing with a fire service with 300 firefighters, but only 8 of them were women. Here's the data showing that there were high rates of upper and lower limb problems and back problems in 1/3. Even though we didn't have enough women to be confident of our results, you'll see in the paper we still presented the results for the women. That's so that this data could be used later by others, or we could at least get an idea whether the women looked like they might be having the same or different amounts of problems. And although the numbers were very small, there was a very niggly kind of data feel here that maybe the women had higher numbers of musculoskeletal disorders. So we used targeted recruitment. We repeated the study, and in this time we recruited 118 females by going all across Canada to do recruitment. And when we did this, we found out that women firefighters had 1.6 times a greater likelihood of having 2 painful areas or more, even after we controlled for differences in age and years of service. The next solution we used was combining multiple studies. So we looked at not only our own study, but we combined it with other studies that we could retrieve from all of the literature. And then we found out that not only were men and women different, but this difference was not the same for different areas of the body. So men actually had more shoulder and knee problems, whereas women had more problems in other areas of the body. This illustrates how important it is to combine data, because the more data we have, the more detailed our analysis can be, and we can find results that are more meaningful. This study just illustrates that it's important to look at things from different perspectives. So in one study, we looked at people self-reporting how much physical problems they were having. In this study, we actually measured Canadian firefighters and healthy match controls and looked at their physiological data in terms of strength and VO2 max. And we found out, not so shockingly, that men firefighters were stronger than women, but we found that women did not have lower VO2 max levels. And this will be important, as you see in our next studies. We did find, however, that VO2 max decreases with age for both men and women. These next couple of studies just show us why it's important to confirm results using different methods and across multiple studies, particularly when you only have a small number of women in each study. So in this study we asked, we know there's physiological differences between men and women, but how does that relate to performing firefighter tasks? So in this study we were particularly looking at a hose drag task. And so this is in full bunker gear. And the only thing that's not very realistic, of course, is we were inside doing this testing, so the hose is not charged. So firefighters performed this task. We looked at a variety of individual factors like age, sex, height, weight, etc. We measured their cardiovascular response, we measured strength, and we measured, of course, how long it took them to do the task. Again, we only had 5 women and 100 men. But what we did see in this data was that women did the uncharged hose drag faster than the men, but they climbed the stairs slower. Men were stronger, which was consistent with our previous study, and we found that women actually had a lower cardiovascular response. Their blood pressure didn't change as much, and their heart rate didn't change as much as the men during performance of the task. So this led us to say, well, are men and women doing the task differently? So for this, we used a different kind of research where we do virtual modeling. Now we're doing biomechanical modeling of the same hose drag task. We had 6 men and 6 women in this study, and we used a motion capture connect system. That data was fed into biomechanical models, and we actually used 3 different approaches to analyze that data. And here's what we found, and we found this amazing, is that when we looked at the biomechanical modeling, the way that the women were doing the task resulted in less compression forces on their spine than the way that the men were doing the task. This is consistent with what women said in the qualitative study, where they said they really had to be mindful of their body mechanics. So in summary, Firewall has a number of strategies. Our idea is that we should always include as many women firefighters as possible in the research. The ways that we do this are we partner with women firefighters, we collect their data, and we listen. We present their data in published research even when the numbers are small and when we cannot be sure about the conclusions, because we know eventually we'll be able to combine that data. We always do analysis of women separately, and it's important to know that we report when men and women are the same and when they are different. Sometimes researchers are excited about differences, but it's very important to acknowledge when men and women are the same and respond the same, just as much as it is to know when they are different. We also think it's very important not to just study weaknesses and negative predictors, but to also study strengths and positive predictors. And I think that we could acknowledge that there might be differences in the way that men and women firefighters would approach a task or duty, but sometimes there are strengths and weaknesses in the ways that each of these would be performed. Finally, it's also important to always acknowledge that when you're looking at group means, that never refers to an individual, and there are variations between people that are sometimes bigger than the variations between groups. I'd like to acknowledge just some here of the firefighter and researcher collaborators that have worked on some of the projects that I've mentioned. If you'd like more information about our work, please go to our website or follow us on Twitter or Facebook.